The stars stretched endlessly, cold pinpricks of light across the velvet dark, and Admiral Thor found the sight boring. His warship drifted at the vanguard of the raiding fleet, its armor plates glowing faintly with the heat of recent battle. Another colony burned somewhere behind them, another group of mewling primitives silenced. He reclined lazily in his command chair, taloned fingers drumming on the armrest, and sighed. "Humans," he muttered, almost with disappointment. "All bluster, no teeth." His bridge crew chuckled, a chorus of obedient sycophants. One officer leaned forward, flicking a holographic map into existence. "Reports confirm this species still divides its territories by dirt lines and oceans. They have barely mastered fusion. Our fleet will be remembered as the ones who broke them." Thor smirked, though his sharp eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of impatience. History remembers victories. This is harvest. The war had become routine. Worlds taken, defenses shattered, civilians scattering like insects. Humanity had resisted at first, sending crude ships to skirmish, but the Empire's navy had cut them down with ease. To Thor, the humans were simply another curiosity destined to become another footnote in his long, decorated career. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, he found himself unsatisfied. Too easy. Too quiet. His thoughts were interrupted when the comms officer stiffened. "Admiral, long-range sensors detect a cluster of structures orbiting a blue-green planet. Rich biosphere, heavy atmospheric signatures. Could be their cradle world." Thor leaned forward, pupils narrowing. "Earth." He let the word roll off his tongue with distaste, as though speaking the name of an unworthy opponent. Finally, the heart of the animal. A ripple of anticipation spread through the crew. Officers exchanged predatory grins, excitement at the prospect of striking the enemy's nest. One junior lieutenant, younger than most, shifted uncomfortably. His crest feathers twitched in unease. "Admiral, is it wise? We have not yet measured the full extent of their defenses. This world is different." The Admiral's eyes snapped toward him, cold and amused. "Different? Lieutenant, these humans have done nothing but die and scatter. What defense do you imagine they could summon? We have fire. They have soil." He leaned back again, dismissing the hesitation with a wave. "Prepare the fleet." Hours later, the armada descended upon the solar system, slipping past the orbit of Mars with contemptuous ease. The human outposts there were already abandoned, their defense grids powerless wrecks. The alien fleet pressed on, a tide of steel and fire. From the bridge of his flagship, Thor studied Earth's blue horizon as it swelled in the viewport. "Beautiful," he admitted reluctantly. "A shame we'll scar it." Weapons charged, cruisers aligned, and the command to open fire trembled on the edge of his tongue. But before the order fell, the comms channel flickered alive. An audio transmission, simple, low frequency, unmistakably human. The voice was calm, measured, terrifying in its restraint. "You have fired on Earth. This is your only warning. Stop attacking or we will stop pretending to be civilized." For a heartbeat, the bridge froze. No grand speeches, no panic pleas, only that unflinching declaration. Then laughter erupted. Officers doubled over, smirking at the audacity. "Pretending? To be civilized," one sneered. "They bluff." Thor chuckled as well, though slower, his gaze lingering on the blue planet. "Arrogant prey. I almost admire the performance." He raised one claw and made the gesture his crew awaited. "Fire." The first salvo rained down. Human defense satellites, primitive, archaic constructs, shattered under the barrage. Explosions blossomed silently in the void. The bridge filled with triumphant chatter, officers congratulating one another on the ease of the assault. But the lieutenant, the same one who had voiced doubt, watched the debris drift strangely. His voice was barely a whisper. "Too easy." Thor heard him, but ignored it. The Admiral's thoughts were on conquest, on the glory of breaking an enemy's heart. Yet a sliver of unease wormed its way into his chest. The humans had not screamed. They had not begged. Only that calm voice, still echoing in his memory. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. Prey often thrashed before the slaughter. "Prepare the next volley," he ordered, his voice steady, confident. The bridge lit with activity, weapons cycling, targeting systems locking onto Earth's orbital ring. And then, just as the command to fire again hovered in the air, the comms lit up once more. A repeat of the message, identical, unwavering. "You have fired on Earth. This is your only warning. Stop attacking, or we will stop pretending to be civilized." The words seemed heavier the second time, carrying something beneath them, a weight the Admiral couldn't name. The crew laughed again, though the sound rang thinner, less certain. Thor let the silence stretch before speaking. So be it. His lips curled into a predator's grin, though his pulse quickened against his will. Let us see how civilized they truly are. Weapons prepared to unleash fire on the cradle of humanity, even as unease gnawed at the edges of the Admiral's pride. The fleet, 1,000 strong, hung poised above the planet. Their laughter and bravado filled the air, yet in the Admiral's chest, a faint shadow of doubt stirred. And somewhere below, hidden beneath blue oceans and green continents, humanity listened. The Admiral raised his hand to give the final command, but the lingering echo of the human warning clung to him like frost. He would not admit it, not to his officers, not to himself, yet in the quiet recesses of his mind the question burned. What if the prey had been waiting? The silence stretched a heartbeat too long, the fleet suspended in arrogance, and Earth remained mute, watching. The wreckage of shattered satellites still drifted like glittering ash across Earth's orbit when Admiral Thor realized something was deeply wrong. His officers cheered at first, their voices echoing across the command deck with triumphant arrogance, but the victory tasted hollow. Earth had not answered. No panicked civilian frequencies, no frantic governments pleading for surrender. Only silence, deliberate and watchful, as though the humans had been waiting for something. That waiting ended when the debris shimmered. Shapes emerged where nothing had been before, vast constructs peeling back layers of invisibility. They unfolded with mechanical elegance, revealing stations and platforms that should have been primitive scrap, but were anything but. Their black hulls gleamed with light-drinking alloys, geometric designs etched with cold precision. Before the Admiral could sneer, the first platform fired. A single beam, too fast to track, carved through one of his cruisers with surgical grace. No explosion, no theatrical destruction, just clean bifurcation, the vessel breaking apart like a toy. The bridge of the flagship fell into silence, broken only by the shrill alarms of incoming fire. "Impossible," hissed one of the officers, his scales paling. "They hid this from us." More beams followed. Ships buckled and tore, drifting powerless into the void. In less than a minute, the proud armada lost more than a dozen vessels. Panic began to bloom at the edges of the crew's discipline. Admiral Thor forced his voice into cold iron. Form lines. Return fire. Overwhelm them with numbers. But even as he gave the command, he saw the flaw. The stations fired with eerie coordination, never missing, never wasting energy. The Admiral had fought wars against proud rivals, against insurgents who clawed with desperation. This was different. The humans were not fighting like prey, they were dissecting their attackers. Then space itself tore. A ripple like heat haze distorted the view near Earth, and through it, a leviathan emerged. At first it seemed too large, a mirage across the stars, until its bulk fully cleared the distortion. The vessel was black and angular, its outlines simple and unadorned, yet it radiated a weight that made the air on the bridge feel thinner. No garish banners, no signals of identity, only silence. The junior lieutenant, the only one who had doubted earlier, whispered, "That is no colony ship." The Admiral could not disagree. His claws dug into the armrest, but he bared his teeth in defiance. One ship cannot turn the tide. As if in answer, the vessel spoke. Its voice carried across every alien frequency, perfectly translated, without static, without strain. "This is the UNS Resolute. You trespassed upon Earth. You ignored our warning. You will now witness the consequence." The words froze the air. Calm, steady, neither pleading nor triumphant, merely inevitable. Thor's lips curled. Bluster. Burn it down. The fleet unleashed its fury. Plasma, torpedoes, mass drivers, all the weapons of an empire poured toward the dreadnought. The Admiral leaned forward, eyes narrowing, waiting for the bloom of fire. It never came. The Resolute shimmered. Space around it bent subtly, as though reality itself resisted. The volleys vanished into nothing, swallowed whole by distortions that rippled outward like waves on water. The ship drifted unscathed. Gasps filled the command deck. A shielding field, no, something more. The Admiral's stomach tightened, but before he could issue another order, the dreadnought answered. Its retaliation was not a flood. It did not drown the fleet in overwhelming fire. Instead, it fired in small, precise bursts. Each shot targeted a vulnerable system, an engine, a reactor control, a weapons array. Ships went dark one by one, their hulls intact but lifeless. The silence was worse than destruction. The humans weren't killing. They were disabling, neutralizing, leaving enemy vessels adrift like corpses with beating hearts. "Why spare them?" an officer stammered, horror edging his voice. "Why not finish the kill?" The admiral did not answer. He understood. This wasn't mercy. It was dominance. The humans were showing they could kill but chose not to, that they could decide the rules of the battlefield. Every officer on the bridge knew it, even if none dared speak it. Then the reports arrived. Wormholes opened across nearby systems, fleets appearing in perfect synchronization. Outposts the aliens had thought vulnerable were now bristling with ships, striking simultaneously at supply lines and forward bases. Humanity hadn't been caught off guard, they had been patient. Every weakness had been a stage in a grand deception. The lieutenant finally found his courage to speak, though his voice shook. "They drew us in. The colonies, the silence, all of it was bait." The admiral wanted to shout him down, to maintain control, but his chest was tight. He looked at the tactical map, his proud fleet fractured, human vessels spreading like an iron web, and he knew the truth. The humans had been watching, waiting, preparing. The comms lit up once more. That same voice, cold and steady, filled the bridge. "The colonies you struck were expendable. The losses you caused were accepted. You have mistaken patience for weakness. Withdraw now or be dismantled." Not a threat. A statement. The crew stared at their admiral, waiting for him to dismiss the message, to laugh it away. But Thor felt a gnawing unease he could not suppress. He had mocked the humans for silence, but now he saw its meaning. Silence was not fear. Silence was discipline. The dreadnought did not move closer. It did not need to. It simply hung there, black and terrible against the stars, as though daring the Empire to test it further. Admiral Thor clenched his jaw, masking his turmoil with a snarl. "Hold formation. Prepare to counter. They cannot fight forever." Yet, deep inside, he knew the war he thought he was waging was gone. The enemy he had mocked as farmers and primitives had peeled away their disguise, and what stood before him was something his empire had never faced, a species that had fought its own kind to near extinction and had learned not to blink. The admiral forced himself to stand tall on the command deck, but his thoughts betrayed him. For the first time in his long career, he was uncertain not of the outcome, but of survival itself. The humans had stopped pretending, and the galaxy would pay the price. Admiral Thor had replayed the battle a dozen times, yet every viewing left him more unsettled than before. The humans had not overwhelmed his fleet with sheer numbers, nor drowned them in firepower. They had fought with surgical precision, crippling ships rather than annihilating them, maneuvering with the patience of predators that had already decided how the hunt would end. He sat alone in his quarters now, the flickering hologram of the UNS Resolute hovering before him like a specter. Its calm broadcast still echoed in his mind, "Withdraw or be dismantled." He had studied countless species across his career, most of them predictable in their desperation. But humans, these creatures, had not begged, had not raged, had not even celebrated. Their silence was more terrifying than any roar of victory. With a slow exhale, Thor pulled up restricted files, fragments of intercepted data humanity had carelessly scattered into space over centuries. Old broadcasts, historical records, archived footage of their wars. The first images were primitive but chilling, trenches filled with mud and blood, soldiers charging into fire with nothing but determination holding their broken lines. Then came mushroom clouds, vast cities reduced to ash in seconds, survivors crawling through ruins as though life itself refused to surrender. He saw steel war machines grinding across battlefields, oceans turned red with naval clashes, skies blackened by bombers blotting out the sun. Humanity's history was not a story of peace. It was an unending rehearsal for annihilation. Thor leaned closer to the projection, claws flexing involuntarily. These were not the wars of amateurs. These were the scars of a species that had turned its own planet into a graveyard countless times and still survived. "They warred against themselves with more ferocity than we've ever faced from our enemies," he murmured, almost to convince himself it was real. If they had done this to their own kind, what would they do to those who dared attack them now? The admiral shut down the files, but the images refused to fade. For the first time, he felt the weight of fear pressing against his discipline. He was not afraid of defeat. Every commander accepts that risk, but of what victory might cost. Against such a people, even survival might prove ruinous. The Empire's High Council summoned him within the day. He stood in the grand chamber, its vaulted ceilings designed to awe and intimidate, though the room felt suddenly fragile compared to the memory of the resolute. The counselors reclined on elevated thrones, their expressions a mixture of arrogance and unease. "You exaggerate," one counselor scoffed after Cthor's report. "So the humans have hidden a fleet. So they built a few clever tricks. We have crushed far stronger rivals." "Stronger?" Cthor snapped, his composure cracking for the first time. "You do not understand. They allowed us to strike them. Every colony, every outpost, they were sacrifices. They knew exactly how we would respond. And when we did, they revealed the truth." Another counselor waved a claw dismissively. "A calculated ambush, nothing more. You faced worse." The admiral's voice dropped low and sharp. "No, I have faced enemies who sought to survive. The humans do not fight to survive. They fight to dominate, to end. They disable my ships, not out of mercy, but to show us they could have destroyed us at will. And then they let us live, to deliver their message." The chamber stirred with unease. Some muttered about human cunning, others laughed nervously. A younger strategist leaned forward, feathers ruffled with tension. "If what you say is true, then we are already at a disadvantage. They have patience, coordination, and weapons we cannot match." The council leader raised a taloned hand for silence. "The Empire has stood for centuries. We have toppled empires, enslaved worlds. Humanity will be no different. They cannot match our numbers, our reach. Fear clouds your judgment, Admiral." Cthor's chest tightened. He wanted to roar, to force them to see what he had seen, but he knew arrogance ran deeper than reason. He bowed stiffly instead, masking the fury in his eyes. "Then prepare yourselves, because they will not wait for us to understand. They are already moving." His warning went unheeded. The council dismissed him, their laughter echoing, as though the humans were just another defiant race awaiting conquest. Yet as he left the chamber, he knew the truth. His empire was blind, and blindness against such an enemy was death. Reports filtered in over the following days, each one a nail driven into the coffin of certainty. Supply lines severed. Communication relays dismantled with surgical precision. Outposts reduced not to rubble, but to silence, completely cut off, as if erased. The humans weren't seeking glory. They were teaching fear, one calculated strike at a time. On the flagship's bridge, Cthor watched his officers fray under the pressure. Some muttered about curses, others about retreat. Discipline slipped. It was the humans' greatest weapon, not just destruction, but psychological warfare. They had learned from centuries of bloodshed how to break an enemy before the final strike ever landed. A junior officer approached cautiously, the same one who had voiced doubt during the first assault. His crest feathers drooped, but his eyes were sharp with grim recognition. "Admiral, they are not fighting us. They are studying us. Every maneuver we attempt, they counter faster. It is as if they know our play before we do." Cthor studied him, seeing in the younger officer a mirror of his own thoughts. "You are correct. They fight not as prey, not even as rivals. They fight as hunters who have grown bored with hiding. And we are the quarry that wandered willingly into their den." The officer hesitated, then asked the question no one else dared. "Can we win?" The Admiral's silence was answer enough. He turned back to the viewport, watching the stars shimmer as another human fleet emerged through a wormhole, precise and patient. They moved without bravado, without the pomp of conquest, as though victory was not in question, but already decided. For the first time in his long service, Admiral Cthor felt the crushing weight of inevitability. The Empire's arrogance had blinded them, and now humanity's shadow stretched across the stars. The Admiral's claws curled tightly around the railing. He would fight, he had no choice, but deep in the marrow of his bones he knew the truth. Humanity had been silent because it had been waiting, and now that silence was over. The war that followed would not decide whether humanity survived. It would decide whether anything else did. The war had ended not with an explosion, but with silence. A silence so profound it felt unnatural, like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The Empire's fleet, once the unshakable symbol of dominance, drifted in ruins, thousands of ships reduced to cold debris or paralyzed hulks. The humans had not annihilated them. They had dismantled them, piece by piece, until resistance was no longer defiance, but futility. Admiral Cthor stood at the shattered viewport of his flagship, watching the wreckage drift. His people had expected him to fight to the last breath, to die roaring rather than bend. But death, he realized, would be too easy. To surrender and live under the shadow of humanity was harder, a wound that would never close. He thought of his career, of the arrogance that had driven him and his council to underestimate these quiet predators. The weight of his failure pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than the void beyond the glass. The comm unit flared again, and the face of Captain Mara Ellen appeared, steady as stone. Her eyes held no triumph, no gloating. They carried the cold fatigue of someone who had not sought this war, but had executed it with precision when it came. "Admiral," she said, her voice even, "your people's survival is no longer in your hands. It rests in your willingness to cooperate. Humanity offers peace, but peace on our terms. Refuse, and there will be nothing left for us to negotiate with." Thor's officers shifted uneasily around him, some muttering, some glaring, but none daring to speak. The admiral raised a clawed hand to silence them. He studied Ellen, her features sharpened not by cruelty, but by conviction. There was strength in her restraint, perhaps more terrifying than any weapon humanity had unleashed. She was the embodiment of the truth he had tried to deny. Humans did not celebrate victory because victory was never their goal. They sought survival, and when forced, domination was simply a byproduct. "You will not rule us," he said at last, his voice low but firm. "We are not broken." Ellen leaned forward slightly, her tone steady as steel. "We don't want to rule you. We want to stop you. You came to our world. You burned our people. You tested us as if we were prey. That era is over. You will govern yourselves under your own banners, but your fleets will never again fly into war without consequence. The galaxy has lived too long in fear of empires like yours." The words struck harder than any barrage of weapons. Thor felt them not as an insult, but as a judgment. And though his pride resisted, some deeper part of him knew they were true. He thought of the young officer who had warned him before the final battle, the one who had whispered that the humans were not fighting for territory, but for principle. Now he understood. Humanity was not seizing the galaxy, they were remaking it. Behind him, his first officer whispered bitterly, "They will enslave us in silence, without chains." "No," Thor replied, surprising even himself. "They will not enslave us. They will watch us. And that is worse." Ellen's image remained, her silence pressing for his answer. Slowly, Thor lowered his head, crest feathers drooping in defeat. "I will speak for my people. I will accept your terms." The transmission closed, and with it, the last thread of the Empire's defiance. On the bridge of the Resolute, Mara Ellen let out a slow breath, though her expression did not soften. Around her, the crew absorbed the moment in silence. Some looked relieved, others wary. No one cheered. This was not a victory to be celebrated, but a burden to be carried. Humanity had revealed its strength, and with it came responsibility heavier than any fleet. Ellen rose from her chair and stepped toward the viewport, where the scattered remnants of the Empire drifted. "Transmit aid protocols," she ordered quietly. "Rescue their wounded. Tow their disabled ships. Show them what conquest does not, mercy." Her crew obeyed, though many exchanged uncertain glances. Mercy was harder than vengeance. Yet that was precisely why it mattered. Humanity had fought with ruthless efficiency, but to rebuild with compassion, that would prove their true strength. As recovery operations began, Ellen allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of Earth, of the cities rebuilt after wars, of scars etched into landscapes and people alike. Humanity had survived its own cruelty. Perhaps that was why they could not allow cruelty to rule the stars unchecked. Thor, watching the humans aid the very fleet they had just destroyed, felt a strange, painful twist in his chest. It was not gratitude, not yet, but something closer to respect. In his long career, he had seen empires conquer with fire, enslave with chains, and raise worlds without thought. But never had he seen a conqueror offer a hand instead of a blade. It unsettled him more than defeat. And in that moment, he understood what the Council had failed to grasp. Humanity's greatest weapon was not its fleets or its strategies. It was its ability to endure, to evolve, to choose restraint when others would choose ruin. That restraint made them unpredictable, and unpredictability made them unstoppable. Hours later, as the last of the Empire's survivors were secured, Ellen stood alone at the edge of the bridge, watching the stars burn cold and distant. She knew this was not the end. The fall of the Empire would send ripples across the galaxy, unsettling powers that had grown comfortable in their dominion. Fear would spread, but so too would opportunity. Her XO approached quietly, hesitant to break her reverie. "Captain," he said, "do you think they'll ever forgive us?" Ellen's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, though it carried no joy. "They don't need to forgive us. They need to remember. Fear fades. Memory endures. That's what will keep the peace." The stars stretched out before her, vast and unyielding. Humanity had not sought this role, but it had been thrust upon them. They were no longer just survivors of an empire's arrogance. They were the arbiters of a new order, one forged not in conquest, but in revelation. And as silence settled once more, Captain Mara Ellen whispered to herself, a vow carried only by the void: "We didn't want this war. But if the galaxy insists on waking us, then it will never sleep again." The galaxy would remember. Not the fleet battles, not the ruins of empires, but the moment humanity stepped from the shadows of survival into the light of power. A power quiet, patient, and absolute. And in that memory, the stars trembled.